Okay, what's up guys, it's Dean. Sorry for the brief delay. Well, I figured out how to use YouTube. I was trying to do this on my computer, but it didn't work, so now I'm on my phone, but it should work out just fine. So, first off, thanks for being here. If you're here live, awesome. If you're not and you're watching this later on, cool. It's still gonna be the same video. You can watch it. And there is sound going there. All right, so got my computer open, so I will be able to see your questions. If you want to type them out, actually just go ahead and test typing out so I can see it. And if you want to leave a comment, it should show up in the chat. So go ahead and leave a comment. If you have a question about breaking bad habits, I'm going to go through. So let me just kind of give you a walkthrough of what this is going to look like. First, I'm going to talk about some kind of an overview of breaking bad habits and really what you should know about it. All right, Slade says hello from Tallahassee. Cool. All right, guys. So this is working. So I will hear you. Steve, what's up? Steve was part of the Be the Better You weekend. We do have another one coming up. I'll talk about that in a second. So here's what's going to happen with this this little broadcast we're doing. So I'm going to talk about kind of an overview of how to break bad habits. So I'm going to go through some of the reasons why traditional strategies aren't very good, and I'm going to talk about some of my own personal experiences with breaking bad habits. Notably for me, some would be maybe on my phone. Also, I had junk food issues, not to the point where it was ever like, really that bad, but I did get rid of eating junk food, and I'll talk about how I did that. And then I'm going to talk about some strategies that you can utilize to get rid of bad habits. But basically, the idea here is if we can understand our habits, then we can change them. So the first part of understanding your habits is understanding that every habit has 4 components. And this is as defined by James Clear in Atomic Habits. The first part of every habit is the trigger or the cue, and this initiates the habit. This makes you have an urge to do something. The next part, and this is often subconscious. Often we don't notice what the trigger is. Sometimes we do, sometimes it's subconscious and it just leads right into the action right away. The second part of the component, second component of every habit is the craving. And this is when we feel the urge to do something. Now, cravings are universal. We have a craving because we want to fulfill a basic human need. It could be alleviating boredom. It could be eating to make sure that we're nourished. It could be a desire for connection, just to be with humans. Maybe we want oxytocin. Or it could be a desire to achieve something. Maybe we craved a dopamine rush. So most cravings are universal experiences, but they lead to specific behaviors or actions. And this is the third component of every habit, the behavior or the action. And this is what we do to alleviate the craving. And there are tons of different actions, an infinite amount of actions. But the reason why we do these actions and why habits exist is because these actions predictably lead to a reward. And usually this reward is somehow related to the alleviation of the craving. And so it's a loop. The trigger or the cue leads to the craving. The craving is addressed by the behavior, and we do the behavior because it helps to alleviate the craving by giving us a reward. And the reward is the fourth component. And we wouldn't do it if not for the fourth component, which is the reward. This is the feeling of satisfaction that we get when we finish a habit. So the main idea for today, to get rid of bad habits, we want to make them impossible to do. We want to make them as difficult as we possibly can to engage in them. And we also want to replace them with good habits that are as easy as possible to do. So the way that we're going to do this mainly is not through motivation. There's this big idea, and I think it might be changing now, but there's this big idea that in order to build new habits, it all comes down to willpower. And if we have enough reasoning or desire behind it, if we saw some shit happen and we don't want to go through that ourselves and it was a powerful event, then we'll have the motivation to be healthy. But here's the thing. Unfortunately, that's really not how it works. it's not going to come down just to motivation. And even if you do think that, you know what, Dean, I don't need all these other tricks or strategies because I have motivation and I can do it myself because I have unlimited willpower. To you, to the unlimited willpower guy, that's fine. But I can guarantee you that if you use these strategies, if you embrace what's called environment design or behavior design, if you do things outside of just relying on motivation to change your habits, you will be more successful with habit change. You will make them last. You will make them be able to make them habits more quickly, and it's just going to make it a lot easier. So why not do it, right? So there's a difference between things that you can do to break habits with motivation and things that you can do to break habits with environment design, or with kind of basically things that you can do ahead of time to plan it out, to make it less convenient to do. Components of this bad habit, and think about what is the most vulnerable component of this habit. So if we look at a habit, I'm going to give you an example. Junk food. All right, so junk food. The cue could be boredom. Smoking. Yeah, let's look at smoking as a habit. And I don't know if you were saying that for another reason, but let's take smoking for an example. And smoking is more than a habit, it is an addiction. So let's say that we feel the need for a quick energy boost, or for a buzz from smoking a cigarette. That leads to the craving, which says, hey, get me a cigarette, I want to smoke it. And that goes to the action of smoking the cigarette, and then that leads to the reward, which I get a buzz from smoking a cigarette. And so that's your habit loop. And now if we're looking at this habit in particular, the way to break it would be to look at the components of it and start to attack those components one by one. So when it comes to the trigger or the cue, is there anything we can do to address that? Probably not. We're still going to feel the desire to get an energy boost. Whether you get that from coffee, whether you get that from getting up and moving, whatever. But we're still going to feel that boost. We're still going to feel that trigger or that cue. It's not really something we control. The craving. We're going to feel the craving, so we can't really do much about that. What we can do for the craving is I'll come back to that in a second, but we can do something for the craving, but there's not a lot we can do in the moment. And then for the action, which is actually smoking the cigarette, we can actually do a lot of things. We can make it so that there are no cigarettes around us. We can make it so that we're inside, and so we have to go outside to do it, and maybe you just don't want to go outside. And then for the reward, you've got the feeling that you get after having the cigarette. So some examples, sorry, I'm burping, excuse me. But basically we get the reward of smoking the cigarette, which is the nicotine, right? So when we look at habits, breaking bad habits, there are a few things that we can do. Now, the first part, I'm going to take a different habit that's a little bit different. Let's go with junk food, just because that's a habit that I can talk about and address each of the components of. So let's look at the junk food habit. Now, a lot of junk food, eating junk food is prompted not by this desire. You're not just sitting there and all of a sudden you're like, man, I really want a donut, which might be the case with you, but for a lot of people, it could be the fact that just the donut is there. Maybe you work in an office setting and the donut is in the break room, or you walk by it and you see a donut. And at that point, you've seen the donut, you have the craving for the donut, and you kind of just go straight into the action of eating the donut. And so that those steps of 1, 2, and 3, trigger, cue, craving, and then action, eating the donut, happen pretty subconsciously. You don't really have a lot of control behind that, except for when you actually get to the donut, and then you realize what's going on, and then you have that decision to, well, I could fight this, or I could just give in and eat the donut. And every part of your biology is saying eat that donut. So that's really tough to avoid. So instead, what we want to do is we want to think about how we can eliminate cues or triggers. So the first way to eliminate a bad habit is by eliminating the cue or the trigger. We prevent the craving from coming up in the first place. And it's important to understand that with this, we're not truly eliminating the behavior, and that's okay. If we can prevent it from repeating itself, that's fine too. So there are a lot of ways that we can design our environment, so to speak, to prevent cues or triggers from showing up in the first place. And the rule with this, with the first law, is to make the cue or the trigger invisible. If we don't see it, then it won't start the habit loop. So a couple examples here. Bad habit, junk food. If I see junk food, I eat it. Fine. So we're gonna make it so that you can't see junk food. You're not gonna have any of it open in your house. You're gonna have it all in the pantry at the back, or in the refrigerator. You're gonna have it at the back of the refrigerator. Maybe it's in a drawer. But the point here is that we're making the cue or the trigger invisible. If you can't see it, it won't prompt the habit. The craving. Now, the craving is not as easily addressed, because once you experience the craving, your brain immediately goes to, okay, how do I get rid of this craving? Let me search previous behaviors for how I alleviated this craving in the past. And that's usually a quote unquote bad behavior. So there's not a ton that we can do to prevent the craving from happening. Once the trigger or the cue hits, we're gonna get the craving. What we can do in this instance is we can do things ahead of time to make the craving seem not as attractive. So the second law here is to make the craving unattractive. And we do this one way is just by thinking about all the bad ways or all the bad outcomes or all the negative effects of the behavior. So if it's smoking, we think about all the bad things associated with smoking. If it is not doing your yoga, if it is eating junk food, we think about all the negative outcomes that come from that. We think about gaining weight. We think about being unhealthy. We think about long-term health issues. So we can think about all the negative things that come from our undesired behaviors, and that can help to curb the craving. But keep in mind, it's not as powerful because we're relying on willpower in this situation. We're balancing the short-term high that we get from engaging behavior versus our long-term selves. So you're gonna have a battle there. Now we can do things, again, like listing all the negative effects of that. We can think about, is this the type of person that I want to be? Is engaging in this behavior reflective of the ideal version that I have of myself? And so we can think of ways to help with our motivation to not do the behavior, but ultimately you're going to get into a battle of willpower here. And so this is kind of a secondary. This is something that's secondary to environment design, which would be like the first rule, making it visible, addressing the cue or the trigger. Now the next step in the habit loop is the actual behavior. This is what we do, and in terms of a bad habit, this is what we do and we want to get rid of. So this is something that we can prevent from happening with environment design. So to do this, we want to think about, there's a few ways to do this, but you basically want to think about, how can I make this inconvenient to do? And I like to take it a step further. I like to think, how can I make this behavior ridiculously inconvenient? So we want to think about, what are all the things that are required for this bad habit? So let's look at junk food, for example. Junk food. In order to eat junk food, in order to engage in that behavior, I need junk food. Well, what happens if I don't have junk food? Can I engage in the behavior? No. So, making it ridiculously inconvenient would mean that you don't keep junk food in your house at all. And in order to get junk food, what you would have to do is drive to the grocery store, drive to a convenience store, buy it, and then come back home. Now, if it's winter and you live in Chicago, that's probably not something that you're gonna do. You don't wanna go outside. You don't wanna put on all your clothes and your coat just so you can buy some candy, right? So, in that instance then, you have a decision. You can let this craving go away, or you can fill this craving with another behavior. And this is a very effective method for changing behaviors, for changing your habits. And this is not breaking the habit entirely. What we're doing here is replacing a behavior with a loop. And ideally, this behavior that we select leads to the same reward that we would have gotten if we had done the behavior that we're used to. So instead of you having ice cream or cookies or something like that, instead, you're gonna have a healthy snack. You're gonna have a piece of fruit. And the reason why this works is because what you really want when you crave junk food, and sweet food, right, sugary food, artificial sugar, what you really crave is. All right, am I back? All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. The internet. All right, so what I was saying is we can replace that feeling that we get from eating sugar, from eating artificial sugar, with a piece of fruit, right? What we really want in this situation is we want sugar because we're noticing that our blood sugar levels are low or they're crashing because you eat like an asshole and you didn't eat well throughout the day. So what we want there is we want food that's going to bring our blood sugar back up. And what your body does in this situation, it looks for the most exaggerated form of sugar that it possibly can. So it looks toward those food items that will give you a dramatic boost of sugar. That's why you crave awful foods when you have a craving, because those foods have dramatic levels of sugar in them, but your body knows this has a ton of sugar in it. I know this is going to satisfy my craving. At the same time, you could just have an apple. You could have a healthy snack instead and still satisfy that craving. So what you're doing here is you're replacing a bad behavior with a similar behavior to achieve a similar outcome. So, and then the fourth component here is the reward, and this is what you actually get. This is the benefit, and this is always a short-term benefit that you get from the behavior. And the reason why it's short-term and not long-term is the same reason why you have to tell your dog that she was bad or he was bad immediately after it happens. If you wait 5 minutes from now and you go back over at him and you say like, you know, I'm really mad at you for chewing your dog toy, he's gonna be like, what are you talking about? That was like, I don't even remember. What are we talking about right now? That's how your brain is when it comes to shaping behavior. You need to be able to immediately tie in the reward of the behavior with the behavior itself. So if there is no immediate return from your behavior, you are not biologically wiring that habit into your brain. You're not wiring it into your brain. So what we need to do is, if we are getting rid of a bad habit, we need to replace it with a habit that does give you a reward right away. So saying, I'm not going to eat junk food this week, and then at the end of the week, I'm gonna treat myself with an ice cream sundae, it's not gonna work. That can be an incentive to help you along the way, but that is not going to be able to directly counter the motivation to eat junk food and get that immediate sugar rush, okay? So when it comes to kind of the rewards thing, what we want to do here is make it as unsatisfying as possible. And we can only do this to a limited extent. This falls into the kind of the motivation category in terms of reinforcing or preventing bad behaviors. Remember, instead, what we really want to do is prevent your ability from engaging in the behavior, which would be the trigger or the cue, or number 3, the action itself, by making it inconvenient. So this is not as effective as those other ones, but it's still something that you should do. And the 4th rule is making it unsatisfying. So when you think about the behavior that you want to do, very similar to the 2nd rule, which is try to make it not very enticing, try to make it unattractive. You want to think about all the negative outcomes. You want to realize, hey, I just had this sugar, I had this food, but I really don't feel that great afterwards. My teeth hurt. I noticed that I have a headache 15 minutes later. So if you can start to associate those negative outcomes with the behavior, then you can start to curb that habit. And instead, you'll look toward a behavior that is better in the long term, and in the short term still alleviates that craving. So that's kind of an overview here. And what we want to do, and you can do this with every habit, but when it comes down to actually getting rid of bad habits, first we want to attack the most vulnerable parts of this habit. And if we can, we want to attack the environment. We want to make it so that we don't notice the cue or the trigger, so that the habit loop is not kicked off to begin with. A good example here is we just moved into a new house back in April, and my wife really wanted to get rid. We learned that the attic was made with some asbestos material, or the attic was made, yeah, with asbestos material, and so she wanted to get rid of it. And it was really expensive, and so I asked someone, like, do we really need to get rid of this? Is there like, is this going to harm us? And the response was pretty universal. It said, as long as you don't bug it, as long as you aren't up there like kicking around and scratching it up dramatically, then it's not going to harm you at all. So the cue trigger, attacking the cue or the trigger here is kind of similar to that. As long as you don't kick it up, as long as you don't ignore the cue or the trigger, then you don't need to worry about whether or not that habit is still in place, because you're not kicking up the cue or the trigger. You're not gonna bug the asbestos. So just avoid the cue or the trigger, and you don't have to worry about that habit. However, for some habits, you're going to notice that you can't prevent the cue or the trigger, in which case you're going to have to go to the second part, which is the craving. Now, can you make it so that the craving is unattractive enough that you won't engage in the behavior? You might be able to. So you might have enough motivation, and you might have written out all the negative outcomes before ahead of time, and you might get to that point, and you might even plan ahead, and you might even say, like, when I do this, I will not do. When this happens, I will not do this. And so you might have enough motivation to prevent that behavior from occurring. But if you don't, then you're going to go on to the action. And in this case, you have to understand that, one, you have the awareness to change the behavior. If you understand what's happening, you have the autonomy to say no to this particular behavior. And then you want to make that behavior as inconvenient as possible. You want to make it so that it's impossible to do, or really inconvenient to do. Some examples of my own life. So I have this really bad habit, or I think it's a bad habit, of coming home and opening up my computer, and then or coming home after I've already worked, and I just finished checking email, I just finished responding to everything for the day, and I'll come home, and the first thing I'll do is I'll put down my briefcase, and then I'll come straight back into the office, back into here, and I'll open up my computer again, and I'll just start doing busy work. So I've learned that this leads to me being overstressed, and it leads to me not recovering very well, and it leads to me basically just wasting my time. Instead of recovering, instead of winding down, I spend my time doing busy work, which isn't really that productive. And so I've associated this with a bad habit. Now, really simple. Last week, I thought about, hey, I'm teaching all this shit on habit design. Maybe I should implement some of this myself. So I took my own advice, and I made it harder to get on the computer. I turned the computer off. So instead of coming home and being able to easily turn the computer on and start using it right away, the computer is off. And usually it's enough for me to click the mouse or hit the enter button and see that the computer doesn't come back on. And that's enough for me to give pause, and that kind of breaks the habit, because usually when I hit enter, the screen comes on, and that's the reward. I get to use the computer, the screen's there, there's all these different notifications, I get to look at new emails. The reward is the what's called predictable variety, what's called predictable variability. There's a book on this called Hooked. But basically the reason why I'm enticed to go on the computer is because I know that there's going to be some variety there. I know that something is going to be interesting, and that's why I go on it. But if I go onto the computer, I hit the enter button, and the screen is still black, that's enough to break the habit. That's enough to teach me, hey, this didn't work, we're gonna have to do something else. So the brain at that point, when you do a behavior and it doesn't lead to a reward, you start to look for other things. You start to look for other behaviors that will lead to a similar result. You start to look for other behaviors that lead to a similar result. Or it might be enough for you to just notice, hey, I didn't really want to engage in that behavior. That's not something that I wanted to do. and me hitting the computer and not opening up, this is really helpful. So there. So that's one way that you can prevent that from happening. And then the next part is the reward, right? And this is kind of what I talked about before with hitting the hitting your computer on and hitting the mouse or hitting the keyboard and then it not turning on. You don't get the reward that you get from that normal behavior of tapping the keyboard or tapping your mouse. And so that's actually enough to break the habit as well, because you're not getting the reward. Also, we can kind of look back at what we did for rule number 2, which is making it unattractive. And if we can think about how to make the reward as unsatisfying as possible, then that can also help. But the bottom line here is that habits are wired into your brain. They are automatic subconscious behaviors, and it is not enough for you to rely on motivation alone. There are things that you can do ahead of time. There are the ways that you can plan in advance. There are things that you can do to alter your environment, to make things as inconvenient as possible, to make it so that you don't cue the trigger that kicks off the habit, and to make it so that you know and plan in advance and know what you're going to do in response to a certain situation. You can plan out a replacement behavior. So if you want to get rid of, let's say you want to get rid of a bad behavior of eating junk food, you can plan in advance that when I experience the craving of junk food, I will eat an apple instead. And you can make that inconvenient by making it so that there's no junk food in your house. So again, it's a combination of environment design, and then also it's a combination of environment design, and then also of planning things out ahead of time, and writing out negative outcomes, negative effects of habits that you want to get rid of, making them as unattractive as possible, and then noticing that there are consequences to this negative behavior. So, all right. Now, I did say this is going to be an AMA. I'm seeing some questions start to come in. Before I do that, I do have a 3-day immersion program focused on building better habits. This is going to start on February 28th. It's in Austin, Texas. It starts, as I just said the date, February 28th. It's a Friday through a Sunday. I do have a few slots open about that. You can learn more on my website at manfulyoga.com/BTBU. I will put that link in here. So check that out. That's going to be a ton of fun. We've done these events. We did this event in October of last year. It was awesome, and I invite you to check it out because, again, it's an awesome event, and a lot of this stuff can be overwhelming, and it helps to be in an immersive experience to really learn how to build better habits and go through all of this stuff in detail and give you motivation to do it. So check that out on my website at manfulyoga.com/blog. /B-the-better. That's a very long link. Be Better You Weekend. You could also go to manfulyoga.com/BTBU. All right. Now, next part. Let's go through some of the questions. So I've got a lot of hellos. If you by the way, huge shout out to you if you are here from the Build the Habit Challenge. We had a record number of signups for our New Year's challenge. This is a really popular challenge. I want to thank you guys for signing up if you did, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback so far. So this is a combination. If you are following it, you know about this. If you haven't, this is a combination of workouts and habit lessons. So your workout's about long, your habit lesson is about 6 to 10 minutes, and you do the workout and then you do the lesson. And so it's kind of like an abbreviated version of this longer presentation I just did, but they're about 8-minute lessons, and they're focused all on building better habits. So you can sign up at any time at manfulyoga.com/BTH. If you are following along to the challenge right now and you're late, if you're a week behind, don't worry about it. It's fine. You have two options. You could jump in on the day that we're on right now. That's what I would recommend doing. And then you can make up past workouts either by doing them at the opposite time of day. So if you want to do today's workout for the challenge in the morning, you can do one of the missed workouts in the evening. You also have weekends to make up missed workouts. So if you, if you skip 2 workouts this week, then you can do those 2 workouts over the weekend. My recommendation is don't miss more than 1 day. So if you miss Tuesday, don't miss Wednesday. Don't get into the habit of skipping 2 workouts. I would also recommend that you do the lessons immediately with the workouts and actually respond to them right then and there. I know personally that if I don't do something right then and there, most likely I'm not going to do it. So if you are following on to a lesson, and I invite you to leave a comment and write your response in the comment section, or to write it out. So writing out behavior design, actually answering the assignment, do it right then and there, don't put it off. Other questions, how do you reschedule your time when family unexpectedly comes or calls? So life is gonna happen, life gets in the way, and here's what you do for it. Number 1 is you protect your time. So you let your people in your life know that your wellness and your well-being is important, and you make time for that. So the best time to do that is doing it when you know that stuff isn't going to happen. So that usually means the morning. If you don't wake up early enough, it's probably because you have an awful night routine. It's probably because you're up watching Netflix, or you're on your phone for 2 hours at night instead of sleeping. As soon as it gets dark, go to sleep. As soon as it gets dark, you gotta wind down. So if you're going to bed too late, again, it's most likely not because you're working. With everyone that I've spoken with, it's because you're watching TV. It's because you're on your phone. So go to bed earlier so you can wake up earlier, and so you can have time to yourself. But again, life does get in the way, so you can have a backup. Eckhart Tolle, I find it very unrelatable. But when it comes to rescheduling behavior, talking about rescheduling events when family or other stuff gets in the way, number 1, protect your time. The second part is have a backup plan. So you might not always have an hour to go to the gym every day, but if you can do a 15 or 20-minute yoga session instead and fit that in as your backup plan, then great. My other advice is don't miss 2 days in a row. So you can miss 1 day in a row, fine, don't get mad at yourself for that, but don't miss 2 days in a row. So that's the advice, but number 1, protect your time. How long does it take to break a behavior? There is a misconception that there is a specific time attached to breaking a behavior, but there are a few factors involved. Number 1 is the intensity of the emotion involved. So if it's something that is extremely intense emotionally, you could break that habit in a day. You might see something traumatic that breaks your habit in a day. But the other factors are frequency and repetition. So the more you can do something, the more you can practice not doing something, that's going to help. And then also, I had one other thing that I recently just wrote down, but the 2 most important things are the intensity, so tying emotion into breaking the habit, and then also the second part is frequency and repetition. But your goal should not be to break a habit, so to speak, because breaking a habit means that you're disrupting the habit loop. Are going to happen again. Most people have bad habits, and they just don't reignite the trigger from happening. They avoid the trigger or the cue. So what you really want to do when it comes to breaking bad habits is, and I wrote this getting rid of bad habits, so which is kind of a misnomer as the title, but what you really want to do is you want to prevent the cue or the trigger from occurring. And that's going to be the most important thing you can do to preventing habits. But how long it takes is entirely up to you. And I wouldn't think about it in terms of how long it's going to take. I would think about it in terms of what can I do to consistently make this behavior very inconvenient? What can I do to make this cue or this trigger invisible? And how can I make this as unmotivating as possible? How can I make it as unattractive and unsatisfying as I possibly can? So again,
that's what you really want to do with breaking a habit. There's not a specific time, unfortunately, but it does depend on intensity of emotion. It depends on what you're willing to do to make it inconvenient or impossible. And it depends on frequency and repetition. You want to get into the habit of saying no to the habit. So I hope that helps. Steve just said, I was in Austin in October for the first Be the Better You weekend. If you have the time and the budget, I highly recommend you go. It truly was life-changing, educational, and fun. Met a great group of guys who were engaged. Steve, yeah, we had a great group. I hope you guys can attend it if you're watching this now. Again, there's a lot of stuff that goes into building better habits, and it helps to be in an immersive environment, immersive experience, to not only have the motivation from being immersed in it, but also other people involved. Those two combinations, intensity and community, help to further whatever your goals are, whatever that experience is that you're attending. It's going to make it help. It's going to help you institute it much more quickly and more effectively. So David says early morning workouts are best for me before starting work or other activities. If you have trouble being consistent with workouts, that is my recommendation. Doing it in the morning. There's a lot of reasons for this. Mainly that early morning, there's not a lot happening. Most people don't schedule things at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock unless you have a dick for a boss. Or you work in the healthcare industry. That's the other thing. If the early morning is the best for you, so early morning is going to be best for building habits because the morning is when you have your most willpower because you haven't expended it on other things yet. It's also a time when there's not a lot going on. And then lastly, there's no time for for other things to come up and get in the way. So if you plan on doing your workouts at 5 o'clock in the evening and then shit hits the fan at work and you have to work late, or maybe there's an emergency at home, maybe there's a happy hour, or maybe your friend texts you and says, hey, I really want to go hang out at 5 o'clock. And you don't have the willpower to say no at that point. So it's much easier to work out in the morning than it is in the evening, but it all depends on your schedule. If evening works better for you, then do it in the evening. And it will probably take some trial and error to figure out what works best for you. It might even have different days. If your work schedule changes, then maybe work out on Monday and Wednesday mornings, but you'll also work out on Thursday afternoons. So it depends on you. Other questions? Let's see here. I'm trying to think if I got any messages or questions. I've already been on for 40 minutes, so that's a pretty long broadcast. So let's wrap this up, actually. Again, you want to get rid of bad habits, you want to make them as inconvenient as possible, and you want to think about all the different ways you can yourself to say no to it, and that involves planning things out ahead of time. That involves thinking about all the negative outcomes that come about from that habit, and that also involves on the environment design side, eliminating the cues or the triggers that lead that habit to that get that habit loop rolling in the first place. And you have to understand the habit in order for that to happen. If you don't understand what the cue or the trigger is, and it could be a combination of factors that combine to form the cue or the trigger, but if you don't understand what that cue or that trigger is, then it's going to be really hard to prevent the cue or the trigger. But there are a lot of things that you can do to make the behavior inconvenient. Sometimes you might have to think outside the box. Sometimes you have to think outside of the box of what a normal person would do. If you really want to break your TV habit, and you'll do anything to break your TV habit, but you still want to keep a TV, put it in the closet. Put your TV in the closet, disconnect all the cords. Whenever you need to watch something, you have to take the TV out of the closet and put it back. So there are things that you can do. If you really want to get rid of bad habits, you can do them. And a lot of the time, it's one action to do it. One final thing about your phone. If you sleep with your phone in your bedroom, move it outside of your bedroom tonight. Never put it in your bedroom again. If you absolutely need to have it on loud, then you can put it on loud in the hallway. But I've heard so many people whose phones just ruin their lives because they use it before they go to sleep or they use it as soon as they wake up in the morning. Don't use your phone in your bedroom. Put it outside in the hallway. Ideally, you put it on airplane mode and you don't worry about it until you're ready to confront the shit show that is life. At least that's what I do. And it helps tremendously. Anyways, speaking of work-life balance, it's almost 7 o'clock. I've been working all day, and more videos, and make more content, and write more blogs tomorrow. We've got a lot of great stuff coming out. If you didn't like this video, by the way, hit the like button, please. And then if you habit to rebuild, it's just something that I want to say, like, it's just do it right now. Don't even, like, I don't know. It's once you do it, it usually gets easy to do it again. So do it. Anyways, what was I saying? I cannot remember. If you haven't subscribed to this YouTube channel yet, make sure you subscribe. We put out great content every week. And then I do have slots open for that Be the Better You weekend. It's going to be a really awesome time. I'll put the link in the description here so you can check it out. And then if you want to join in on the Build the Habit Challenge, you can join that at manfulyoga.com/BTH. It is very inexpensive to join. Usually our programs are about $49 minimum, and this program is a fraction of that, so I highly recommend signing up. It's an awesome deal, and we don't do sales this low really ever. So check out that program if you want to jump in and join the challenge, and also get some great workouts to do. You can learn more about the challenge on that link, manfulyoga.com/BTH. I'm not going to respond to questions about specifics on it because that's all on that page. And yeah, all right, that's it, guys. Have a great night. Thanks for watching. I'm going to be doing this again next week, possibly. Definitely releasing a video next week. And next week, I'm going to be talking about how to build better habits. So we're going to be doing the opposite of this lesson today. All right, guys. Have a good night. See you later.